Look at this pathetic old man with his dollar store shoes and Walmart clothes. Jennifer Morrison's voice echoed through the glass wall. Executive suite as she pointed at the elderly janitor cleaning windows. Her diamond bracelet catching the morning sunlight, streaming into the Chicago high-rise. Thomas, I don't understand why your company employs these homeless-looking people. It's embarrassing when my friends visit and they see ... Well, Jennifer didn't know, what nobody in that luxury office tower knew except me. Uncle Sam, who'd been working building security for 3 years, was that the pathetic old man she was mocking was actually Henry Chen, a self-made multi-millionaire worth $47 million who'd sold his tech company and now worked as a janitor because cleaning helped him process the grief of losing his wife while staying connected to the working class folk. You see, I'd watched Henry start this janitor job about 8 months ago, right after his wife Susan died from cancer. The man didn't need the money, didn't need the work, but he needed something to fill the emptiness that 43 years of marriage leaves behind when it ends. And what I'd learned about Henry's real story was going to make Jennifer Morrison's cruel judgment look even more ignorant than it already sounded. Before I tell you how this trophy wife's classist mockery backfired in the most humbling way possible, let me ask you something real. Have you ever watched someone judge another person based purely on their job or appearance without knowing anything about their actual story? Drop your city in the comments and tell me about times you've seen people dismissed or mocked because of how they looked or what work they did because what happened next in that Chicago office building is going to remind you that you never really know who you're talking to, you know? Now, if you'll pardon an old man for taking a moment here to settle in, stories about people finding dignity in honest work always hit me different. At my age, having spent decades watching how folks treat each other based on nothing but assumptions, I've learned that the quietest people in the room are sometimes carrying the biggest stories. Thank you for bearing with Uncle Sam as I tell you about one of the most satisfying lessons in humility I ever witnessed. To understand how Henry Chen ended up pushing a mop cart through luxury offices despite having more money than most of the executives working there. We gotta go back about 9 months to when his whole world fell apart in the space of 18 devastating months. Henry had built his life around two things: his software company that he'd founded in 1998, and his marriage to Susan Chung, his college sweetheart who'd believed in him when he was just a broke engineering student with big dreams and no money. Henry and Susan's story was one of those classic American success tales, right? They'd met at Northwestern University in 1979. Both of them children of working-class immigrant families who'd sacrificed everything to give their kids opportunities for education and advancement. Henry's parents had come from Taiwan in the 1960s, working restaurant jobs while saving every penny for their son's college fund. Susan's family had immigrated from Korea, running a small grocery store on the south side where they worked 18-hour days and never took vacations. The young couple understood struggle in their bones, understood that success wasn't about being smarter or more talented than others, but about being willing to outwork everyone while never forgetting where you came from. They got married 3 days after graduation in 1983, held the ceremony at a community center because they couldn't afford anything fancy, and started building their life together with $800 in savings and unlimited determination. Henry worked as a software engineer at IBM while Susan taught elementary school. And they lived in a studio apartment that was so small you could touch opposite walls while standing in the middle. But they were happy in that particular way that comes from building something together, from knowing that every sacrifice was bringing them closer to the life they dreamed about during those college study sessions. The breakthrough came in 1998 when Henry developed Specialized, database management software that could help hospitals track patient records more efficiently. He'd been working on the project in their basement for 3 years, often staying up until 3 a.m. coding, while Susan graded papers at the kitchen table upstairs, occasionally bringing him coffee and reminding him to get some sleep. Henry founded DataMed Solutions. With $15,000 they'd saved and Susan's unwavering belief that his software would revolutionize healthcare information management. The company grew slowly at first, picking up small contracts with individual hospitals, then health systems, then eventually becoming the industry standard for patient data management across most of the United States. By 2018, DataMed Solutions was doing $120 million in annual revenue with 400 employees and clients that included most major hospital networks in North America. Henry had built something real and valuable, creating jobs and genuinely improving healthcare operations while maintaining the ethical standards and worker-friendly policies that Susan insisted were non-negotiable. But success never changed them in the ways that wealth changes most people. Henry and Susan still lived in the same modest house in Evanston they'd bought in 1991, drove cars until they literally couldn't run anymore, and spent their wealth on supporting causes they cared about, scholarships for immigrant students, funding for inner-city schools, programs that helped working-class families afford health care. The wealth they'd accumulated wasn't about luxury or status. It was about security and the ability to help others the way they'd once needed help themselves. Susan used to say that money was just a tool for building things that mattered, and Henry agreed completely. Their happiest moments weren't at fancy restaurants or luxury vacations, but during quiet evenings at home, working in their garden or reading together on the porch. Then in 2021, Susan was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and Henry's perfect life started collapsing in slow motion. The doctors gave her 6 months, maybe a year with aggressive treatment. Henry immediately stepped back from DataMed Solutions, putting trusted executives in charge so he could focus entirely on Susan's care and making every remaining day meaningful. They spent that final year doing everything Susan had always wanted to do, but they'd postponed in favor of building the business, traveling to see national parks, visiting family in Taiwan and Korea, spending weeks at a time, just being together without work or obligations interfering. Henry burned through money like it was nothing, hiring the best doctors, trying every treatment, fighting with everything modern medicine could offer. But cancer doesn't care about money or determination or the fact that Susan Chun was one of the best people who'd ever lived. She died on March 15th, 2022, 18 months after diagnosis, in the bedroom of their Evanston home with Henry holding her hand and their 2 grown children keeping vigil. Susan's last words to Henry were about not letting grief destroy him, about finding ways to stay connected to the values they'd built their life around, about remembering that he'd survived poverty and struggled before and could survive this too. She made him promise not to become one of those wealthy people who forgot where they came from or started thinking their money made them better than others. After Susan's death, Henry sold DataMed Solutions for $52 million to a larger healthcare technology company that promised to maintain the worker-friendly culture he and Susan had established. He kept $47 million after taxes and philanthropic donations, more than enough for several lifetimes of comfortable retirement. But retirement turned out to be a special kind of hell for Henry Chen. The house felt empty without Susan's presence. Friends tried to help, but couldn't fill the gap she'd left. His children had their own families and lives. Sitting around with nothing but grief and memories was slowly killing him in ways that cancer never could. That's when Henry remembered something Susan had said during one of their late-night conversations while she was sick. She'd been talking about the happiest times in their marriage, and she kept coming back to those early years when they were struggling, Henry working his engineering job, Susan teaching, both of them cleaning their tiny apartment together on weekends, making meals from scratch because eating out was too expensive. We were happy then because we were building something together, Susan had reflected. The work itself mattered, not because it was prestigious or well paid, but because it was real, and we were doing it side by side. I think people find meaning in honest work, in contributing something tangible, in being useful. That's what I'll miss most, not the success or the money, but the feeling of doing something that needed doing. Those words haunted Henry during his lonely retirement months. He'd spent so many years in executive suites and board meetings that he'd forgotten what it felt like to do simple, straightforward work that had immediate, visible results. His days felt purposeless and disconnected from the values he and Susan had built their lives around. That's when Henry came up with an idea that his children thought was insane, but which made perfect sense to him. He'd get a job as a janitor, doing the kind of straightforward physical work that required enough focus to quiet his grief-stricken mind while keeping him connected to working class people who reminded him of his parents and his younger self. Let me pause here for just a second to catch my breath, because thinking about Henry's decision still moves me. At my age, having watched people deal with grief in every way imaginable, I gotta say this man's approach was something special. He could have spent his millions on therapy, travel, distractions, but instead he chose honest work alongside regular folks who were just trying to make it. That takes a kind of wisdom and humility you don't see often. Henry's job search was surprisingly difficult because he was overqualified for every position he applied for, and his advanced age made hiring managers suspicious about his motivations. He finally got hired by Clean Tech Services, a janitorial company that contracted with office buildings throughout Chicago. By deliberately omitting most of his work history and presenting himself as a retired factory worker who needed supplemental income. The hiring manager was a no-nonsense woman named Maria Rodriguez who saw something genuine. Henry's request for honest work. Most people your age who apply here are desperate, she told him during the interview. You don't look desperate, you look determined. Like, this job means something to you beyond the paycheck. My wife just died, Henry explained simply. And I need to stay busy doing real work with real people. I need to remember what it feels like to accomplish something tangible at the end of every day. Maria understood that kind of grief without needing further explanation. She hired Henry on the spot and assigned him to Morrison Financial Services, a wealth management firm occupying 5 floors of a luxury high-rise in the Loop. The assignment was perfect, stable, straightforward, full-time hours, cleaning offices where wealthy people made money by moving other people's money around. My first encounter with Henry came during his second week on the job, when I noticed something unusual about the new elderly janitor who moved through executive suites with the careful attention of someone who understood professional office culture from the inside rather than just cleaning around it. He organized his cleaning supplies with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years optimizing workflows. He prioritized tasks with strategic thinking that suggested extensive management experience. Most tellingly, I'd see him pause sometimes while cleaning conference rooms, looking at financial presentations and strategic planning documents with the focus of someone who genuinely understood what he was reading. This wasn't a man just pushing a mop around. This was someone with significant business experience, trying to figure out what the hell he was doing cleaning other people's offices. I started paying closer attention to Henry, wondering if he was conducting corporate espionage or planning some elaborate theft. But the more I watched, the more I realized he wasn't interested in stealing anything. He was just working, genuinely, honestly working, finding satisfaction in tasks completed and floors cleaned and windows made spotless. One night after most people had left, I approached him while he was cleaning the executive break room. You're either the world's most overqualified janitor, I said quietly, or you're conducting some kind of investigation that I should probably know about since I'm responsible for building security. Henry looked up from the espresso machine he was cleaning, studied me for a long moment, then smiled with genuine warmth. Neither, actually. I'm just an old man trying to figure out how to keep living after losing his wife. Turns out that cleaning offices helps more than sitting at home drowning in grief. Something about his straightforward honesty broke through my professional suspicion. We started talking, and over the next several weeks, I learned Henry's real story. The software company he'd built, the wealth he'd accumulated, the wife he'd lost, and his unconventional approach to processing grief through manual labor. People think grief is something you get over, Henry explained during one of our late-night conversations. But Susan and I were together 43 years. She wasn't just my wife. She was my business partner, my best friend, the person who made every day make sense. You don't get over losing that. You learn to carry it while finding new ways to stay connected to what mattered about the life you built together. And cleaning offices helps. I asked, genuinely curious about his reasoning. More than you'd think, Henry replied. Susan and I used to clean our apartment together when we were young and broke. Some happiest memories are from scrubbing floors and washing windows while she sang off key and we planned our future. This work reminds me of those days before the money and success complicated everything. It reminds me who we really were underneath all the business achievements. That conversation sealed our friendship. I became Henry's quiet protector in the building, making sure nobody gave him trouble and keeping his real identity private. Most people ignored him completely anyway, treating janitors as invisible furniture that cleaned up after them without deserving acknowledgement or basic courtesy. But there was one person who didn't just ignore Henry. She actively mocked him with the kind of casual cruelty that wealthy people sometimes inflict on those they view as beneath their social status. Jennifer Morrison was the 32-year-old trophy wife of Thomas Morrison III, a senior vice president at Morrison Financial Services who'd inherited his position from his father and grandfather rather than earning it through talent or hard work. Jennifer was everything you imagine when someone says rich, mean girl who never grew up. She was beautiful in that expensive, high-maintenance way that requires personal trainers, stylists, and cosmetic procedures. She dressed exclusively in designer clothes, drove a Range Rover that cost more than most people's houses, and treated service workers with contempt that suggested she genuinely believed wealth indicated moral superiority. She'd show up at her husband's office several times a week, usually after spending mornings shopping or getting spa treatments, and she'd make a point of commenting loudly about the building's cleaning staff, maintenance workers, and other employees she considered beneath her notice. Her remarks were always designed to demonstrate her own superiority while humiliating people who couldn't afford to fight back. Henry became one of Jennifer's favorite targets because his age and humble appearance made him an easy victim who she assumed would never challenge her abuse. She'd make comments about his dollar store clothes, his homeless appearance, his pathetic job. Anything she could think of that would make her feel powerful and important by making him feel small and worthless. Thomas, look at this sad old man, Jennifer would announce whenever she saw Henry cleaning. He's probably 80 years old and still pushing a mop around because he was too stupid to save for retirement. This is what happens when people don't apply themselves. They end up scrubbing toilets for minimum wage until they die. Her husband Thomas would laugh weakly at these comments, clearly uncomfortable with his wife's cruelty, but too dependent on her family's wealth and connections to speak up. Jennifer had come from old Chicago money, and Thomas's financial position was largely due to her family's investments in Morrison Financial Services. Challenging her behavior meant risking the wealth and status that defined his identity. Henry endured Jennifer's abuse with remarkable grace, never responding to her provocations, never showing anger or hurt, just continuing his work with quiet dignity. He'd learned during his years building his company that some people reveal their true character through how they treat those who can't benefit them or retaliate against them. And Jennifer's behavior told him everything he needed to know about her values. But I watched Henry's face during these encounters, and I could see that Jennifer's cruelty was landing harder than he wanted to admit. This wasn't just about professional insults. It was about being judged as a failure and a burden, about having your life's work in personal dignity dismissed based on superficial observations by someone who'd never struggled for anything. The pattern continued for months, with Jennifer escalating her mockery whenever she visited the building. She'd bring friends specifically to show them the pathetic old janitor and make fun of his appearance. She'd intentionally make messes and then comment loudly about how some people spend their whole lives cleaning up other people's garbage. Other employees were clearly uncomfortable with Jennifer's behavior, but nobody spoke up. This was a culture where wealthy clients and executive spouses were treated like royalty regardless of how badly they behaved. Challenging Jennifer would be career suicide for anyone who valued their job security. The confrontation that would expose. Jennifer's cruelty and humble her completely began on a Wednesday morning when she arrived at her husband's office with 3 friends, all of them carrying shopping bags from Michigan Avenue, boutiques, and clearly several mimosas into what was probably an all-day drinking session. Henry was cleaning the glass walls of the executive suite, making them spotless with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that he'd once applied to writing code and managing teams. He was wearing his standard janitor uniform, simple work pants, a Clean Tech Services polo shirt, and the worn but clean sneakers that Jennifer had mocked repeatedly. Oh my God, he's still here. Jennifer announced to her friends, pointing at Henry like he was an exhibit at a zoo. Thomas, I thought you were going to talk to building management about getting rid of this homeless-looking man. He's literally embarrassing to look at. Thomas tried to redirect the conversation, but Jennifer was too committed to her performance for her friends. She needed to demonstrate her dominance, needed to show these other wealthy women that she had the power to humiliate people without consequences. Seriously, look at him. Jennifer continued, walking closer to Henry with her entourage following. Those shoes probably cost $5 at Walmart, and that shirt looks like it's been washed 1,000 times. Do you think he owns any other clothes, or does he just wear the same outfit every single day because he's too poor to afford anything else? Her friends laughed, emboldened by alcohol and the assumption that mocking a janitor was acceptable entertainment. Henry continued cleaning the glass, his movements steady and controlled despite the public humiliation happening 3 feet away. "Hey, old man," Jennifer called out, snapping her fingers to get his attention. "I'm talking to you. Do you understand English? Or should I speak slower because you're probably not educated enough to follow normal conversation?" Henry finally turned to face Jennifer, his expression neutral, but his eyes carrying the kind of quiet strength that comes from surviving real hardship, rather than just shopping away boredom. "I understand English perfectly well, ma'am," he said politely. "Is there something you need?" Jennifer's face lit up with cruel satisfaction at getting a response. "Oh, he speaks?" And with an accent. How exotic. "Tell me, old man, where are you from originally?" "I'm guessing some poor country where people dream about coming to America to clean toilets, right?" "I was born in Taiwan," Henry replied calmly, "and I've been an American citizen for over 60 years. My parents immigrated here legally in 1961, worked extremely hard to give me opportunities, and I've tried to honor their sacrifices by building a meaningful life." The quiet dignity in Henry's response should have ended the confrontation. But Jennifer was too drunk and too committed to her humiliation campaign to recognize when she'd pushed far enough. "A meaningful life?" she repeated mockingly. "Buddy, you're 80 years old, cleaning windows for minimum wage. That's not a meaningful life? That's a failure to plan? That's what happens when you don't apply yourself in school or make smart career choices." One of Jennifer's friends chimed in, trying to outdo her hostess. "Girl, you're so right. Like, imagine reaching the end of your life and realizing you spent it scrubbing other people's toilets. How depressing is that?" Thomas Morrison finally tried to intervene, sensing that this was crossing lines even for his wife's usual cruelty. "Honey, maybe we should let him get back to work. I'm sure he's got other areas to clean." But Jennifer wasn't finished. She'd found a victim who wouldn't fight back, and she wanted to extract every drop of satisfaction from her perceived superiority. "No, Thomas, I think this is an important teaching moment. This man represents what happens when you make poor life choices. Our children need to understand that education and ambition matter, or they end up like this, old, poor, and doing work that nobody respects." She turned back to Henry, her voice dripping with condescension. "Tell me, janitor man, do you regret not trying harder when you were young? Do you wish you'd gone to college or learned a real skill instead of spending your entire life doing work that literally anyone could do?" Henry looked at Jennifer for a long moment, probably calculating whether to continue enduring her abuse in silence or to respond in ways that might reveal more about himself than he wanted to share. I could see the internal debate playing across his face, maintain his anonymous grief processing peace, or defend his dignity against someone who clearly viewed him as subhuman. That's when I decided I'd watched enough of this circus and needed to intervene before Jennifer said something so cruel that even Henry's remarkable patience would snap. I'd been standing near the reception desk, documenting the whole encounter on the building's security cameras while calculating the best moment to step in. "Mrs. Morrison," I said loudly enough to cut through her tirade, "I think you should probably stop talking right now before you embarrass yourself even more than you already have." Jennifer whirled to face me, her expression shifting from cruel satisfaction to indignation. "Excuse me? Who the hell are you to tell me what to do? You're just building security, which puts you barely one step above this janitor on the social ladder. Mind your own business before I have my husband get you fired." "I'm Sam Rodriguez," I replied calmly. And I've been head of building security here for 18 years. And I'm telling you that the man you just called a failure who made poor life choices is actually Henry Chun, founder of DataMed Solutions, which he sold 2 years ago for $52 million. The pathetic old janitor you've been mocking for months is worth more than your husband's entire net worth. And he's doing this work by choice while processing grief from losing his wife of 43 years. The silence that followed was so complete, you could hear the ventilation system humming. Jennifer's face went through about 6 different expressions: confusion, disbelief, calculation, panic, and finally the dawning horror of someone realizing they just publicly humiliated a multi-millionaire while being recorded. Her friends had already started backing away, clearly calculating how to distance themselves from someone who just committed social suicide in front of witnesses. Thomas looked like he might have a heart attack, his face cycling through shades of red and white as he realized his wife had been abusing someone who could probably buy and sell Morrison financial services without checking his bank balance. That's not possible, Jennifer stammered, trying to process information that contradicted everything she'd assumed about Henry based on his appearance and job. If he's really that wealthy, why would he be working as a janitor? That doesn't make any sense. Henry finally spoke, his voice carrying authority that transformed him from invisible service worker to someone who'd built something real and valuable through decades of effort. Jennifer, not everything in life is about maximizing status or demonstrating wealth. My wife Susan died 18 months ago after 43 years of marriage. We built our life together from nothing. I was a broke engineering student when we met. She was a teacher's daughter whose family ran a grocery store. We understood struggle and honest work because we've lived it. After Susan died, Henry continued, his voice thick with emotion he usually kept hidden. I sold my company because running it without her felt meaningless. I had more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, but I had no purpose, no connection to the values Susan and I built our life around. So I took this job because cleaning offices reminds me of our early years together when we were happy despite being poor. It reminds me that dignity comes from how you treat people, not from how much money you have or what status you've achieved. The weight of Henry's explanation hung in the air, making Jennifer's earlier mockery seem even more cruel and ignorant by contrast. She judged a man's entire worth based on his shoes and his job, never imagining that he was carrying a love story and a grief journey that her privileged life had never prepared her to understand. Furthermore, I added, pulling out my phone to show the security footage I'd been collecting, I have about 6 months of recordings showing you repeatedly mocking Mr. Chen, making racist comments about his ethnicity, and generally behaving like someone who thinks wealth and beauty give you permission to treat other human beings like garbage. This footage is about to be shared with your husband's employer, posted on social media, and sent to every person in your social circle so they can see exactly who you really are when you think you're punching down. Jennifer's panic was immediate and complete. You can't do that. This is entrapment or invasion of privacy or something. I have rights. Actually, I explained patiently. These are building security cameras recording public areas where there's no expectation of privacy. And I'm not doing anything illegal by documenting harassment and creating a hostile environment, which is exactly what you've been doing to Mr. Chun for months. The question is whether you want this to go public or whether you want to apologize sincerely and reflect on why you think treating people this way is acceptable. Thomas Morrison stepped forward, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 5 minutes. Mr. Chun, I'm profoundly sorry for my wife's behavior. There's no excuse for the way she's treated you, and I take full responsibility for not stopping it sooner. Please, is there anything we can do to make this right? Henry studied Thomas for a moment, probably recognizing a weak man who'd enabled cruelty through his silence rather than risking his comfortable position. Thomas, you stood there and watched your wife humiliate me for months. You laughed at her jokes, you encouraged her behavior through your silence, and you never once thought that maybe the janitor you were all mocking might have his own story, his own dignity, his own worth as a human being. The apology I want, Henry continued, isn't from you or your wife. I want you to start treating every service worker in this building, janitors, security guards, food service workers, everyone, with the basic respect that all human beings deserve. I want you to understand that the person cleaning your office might be carrying grief you can't imagine, or building dreams you wouldn't believe, or possessing wisdom and experience that your inherited privilege never required you to develop. Henry then turned to Jennifer, who was crying now, not from genuine remorse, but from fear of social consequences. And you, Jennifer, need to understand something important. Wealth doesn't make you better than other people. Beauty doesn't make you better than other people. Your husband's executive position doesn't make you better than other people. The only thing that separates human beings is how they treat others, especially those who can't benefit them or retaliate against them. You treated me like dirt because you thought I was powerless, Henry continued, his voice gentle despite the devastating truth he was delivering. You never imagined that I might be someone who'd built wealth beyond your comprehension. Someone who'd achieved success through talent and effort rather than marriage and inheritance. That says everything about your character and nothing about mine. The aftermath of Jennifer's exposure was swift and comprehensive. The security footage went viral within hours, generating millions of views and universal condemnation from people horrified by her casual cruelty and blatant classism. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about judging people by appearances and the hidden lives that service workers often carry. Jennifer's social position collapsed within days. Her wealthy friends abandoned her, not wanting to be associated with someone who'd become a symbol of entitled cruelty. Charity organizations removed her from their boards. Her husband's employer quietly requested that she stop visiting the office because her presence made employees uncomfortable. Thomas Morrison's career suffered collateral damage from his wife's behavior and his own complicity in enabling it. While he wasn't fired, he was passed over for promotion he'd been expecting, with firm leadership explaining that someone who'd tolerated workplace harassment and abuse didn't demonstrate the judgment required for senior leadership. But the most satisfying outcome was the broader conversation. Henry's story sparked about how society treats service workers and the assumptions wealthy people make about those in working-class jobs. His decision to work as a janitor, while grieving, resonated with millions of people who understood that honest work had dignity regardless of pay or status. Henry's story also inspired other wealthy people who'd been considering similar paths, using their financial security to pursue work that satisfied them personally rather than maximize status or income. Several successful entrepreneurs reached out to share their own experiences taking lower status, jobs that brought them happiness that executive suites never had. The clean tech services company that employed Henry received a $2 million donation to establish better benefits and higher wages for all their janitorial staff, with Henry quietly funding the initiative while requiring it be credited, an anonymous benefactor who understands the value of honest work. Henry continued working as a janitor for another 6 months, before finally feeling ready to move forward with his grief journey. He didn't need the job anymore. The work had served its purpose in helping him process Susan's death while staying connected to the values they'd built their life around. After leaving cleantech, Henry established the Susan Chen Foundation, which provided scholarships for working-class students pursuing STEM degrees, while also funding programs that taught business ethics and the importance of treating all workers with dignity, regardless of their position. Jennifer Morrison, meanwhile, essentially disappeared from Chicago society. Reports suggested her marriage to Thomas had survived, but barely, with the couple moving to a different city where her viral infamy was less well known. Her attempts to rehabilitate her image through charity work and public apologies were met with skepticism from people who remembered the security footage of her gleeful cruelty. Years later, the incident remained a landmark case in discussions about class, respect, and the hidden lives of service workers. Business schools used Henry's story to teach lessons about not judging people by their current position, and human resources departments showed the security footage as examples of behavior that created hostile work environments. As I reflect on this case years later, I'm struck by how Henry's unconventional approach to grief ended up exposing truths about respect and dignity that needed exposing. His decision to work as a janitor wasn't just about processing his loss. It was about staying connected to the values that he and Susan had built their life around. Values that prioritized honest work over empty status. The investigation reminded me that you never really know what someone's carrying with them, what battles they're fighting, what losses they're processing, what dreams they're building. Henry taught everyone who witnessed his story that treating people with respect and dignity isn't about being nice to those who might be secretly wealthy. It's about recognizing that every human being deserves basic courtesy, regardless of their apparent status or position. So, what do you think about how society treats service workers? And have you ever been surprised to learn someone's real story after judging them by their appearance or job? Have you worked in service positions where customers treated you poorly? Or have you caught yourself making assumptions about others based on superficial observations? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what city you're watching from and share any experiences you've had with people who look past appearances to recognize someone's real worth, or with being judged unfairly based on your work or your clothes. But before you go, I need to tell you about Uncle Sam's next investigation, because it involves something that will restore your faith in veterans and remind you that heroes don't stop being heroes just because they're homeless. Picture this. A Karen who called police on a black family at a community pool, claiming they were trespassing and threatening her children, not knowing that the threatening father was actually a decorated war hero whose story would make her look like exactly the racist she really was, right? Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because Uncle Sam's next story exposes I watched Karen attack homeless veteran. He was decorated war hero. The lesson from Henry Chen and Jennifer Morrison's story remains clear. Grief and wealth can coexist, dignity and humble work aren't contradictory, and treating people with respect should never depend on knowing their bank balance or their backstory. Because sometimes the janitor you're mocking is carrying more wisdom and wealth than you'll ever possess. And sometimes the clothes someone's wearing tell you absolutely nothing about the life they've built or the person they really are. Girl. And sometimes it takes an old security guard with 40 years of experience watching human nature to recognize that the quietest person in the room might be the one with the most powerful story to tell.